Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 28th, 2023. Well, we're in the midst of a flurry of diplomacy, a continued pause in the Gaza war, continued war in Ukraine, but the days ahead will be days of decisions. And I want to go through some of the options to fighting these continual perpetual wars. But the options will depend on a mobilization of the population of especially the countries in Europe and the citizens in the United States. Now, just to give you a sense of the flurry of activity, yesterday was the end of the 4-day pause, the so-called ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. And the decision was made to extend it for 2 more days to allow for more hostage exchange. Unfortunately, Netanyahu and his government insist that at the end of this pause, there will be continued killing in Gaza. There was a European Union Mediterranean conference in Barcelona. And I'll give you a report on that in a moment, but it actually shows that there's some flexibility, at least an appearance of flexibility among governments in Europe. Also yesterday, there was the Primakov Forum in Russia, which is named after the former Prime Minister Yevgeny Primakov, who initially put forward the idea of a Russia-India-China alliance. Putin spoke and made some very significant comments in terms of the question of what kind of decisions have to be made. He said the Western model of globalization created out of self-interest of the Western countries, that is the imperial model, he said it is now obsolete. And he identified the battle between those nations that are formerly colonial nations, especially in the global south, allied with Russia and China and the BRICS, against the declining, obsolete model of the West. And this is continuing the push coming from Russia and China and the BRICS and the global South for a more just, fair development order and a break with the weaponization of the dollar, which has been used to keep nations poor and under the control of the unipolar order. Now, today there's going to be a UN Security Council special session that will be chaired by the Chinese. It will probably take up the Chinese proposal for a comprehensive peace conference to deal with the crisis in the Middle East, not just by putting forward the idea of an end to fighting, but a move toward economic development in a region which has been subjected to permanent war, particularly when you look at Syria and Iraq and the conditions in Yemen and elsewhere. The Chinese proposal is for taking up the question of economic development, which is completely coherent with what we in the Schiller Institute have been doing with the International Peace Coalition. Now, Netanyahu is under intense pressure internationally and within Israel, but he insists on what he believes is a military path of destruction of Hamas, that's the way to achieve peace. Now, many, including in Israel, believe that this is a path of destruction for Israel. So we look at what happened with the meeting in Barcelona yesterday of this Mediterranean countries. There were foreign ministers from 42 nations there. And it was co-chaired by the European Union Commission Vice President, Josep Borrell, and the Jordanian Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi. Israel refused to attend, which gives you a sense of the problem of dealing with Israel, which refused to participate in an international conference out of fears that it will be condemned. Well, maybe it should be involved in a discussion process. Maybe it should try and figure out why the rest of the world is standing up against the Israeli policy. Now, there's a warning from the Egyptian Foreign Minister Shukri that despite international rejection of this, Israel intends to displace the Palestinian population of Gaza, We've already seen over close to 1 million, maybe more than 1 million people forcibly removed from northern Gaza to southern Gaza, where there's no place to house them, to care for them, to provide for their needs. And this is reminiscent of the 1948 Nakba, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, where the Palestinians were removed from their homes and their homes were destroyed. If you look at photos coming from northern Gaza, you'll see that at least half of the houses have been destroyed or severely damaged. So there's no place for people to go home to. And in the south, there's not an infrastructure for them to stay. So what's the policy? Well, the Egyptian foreign minister said this is a proof of the intent to move them out of Gaza. And he called on the European nations to play a leading role in recognizing a Palestinian state. Now, Josep Borrell was surprisingly rational. He said there should be, one, an extension of the pause in fighting to allow time to work for a political solution. Secondly, he said no recolonization of Gaza by Israel, which is the concern of many of the Palestinians and governments around the world, that Netanyahu intends to move settlers into Gaza and put it under Israel Defense Forces control. Borrell also said no to illegal colonization of the West Bank. And you probably have heard that the settlers movement is aggressively attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, the problem is you have the Biden administration continuing to reject the idea of a long-term ceasefire, continuing to offer arms and support to Netanyahu for his policies. So the question is, how do you achieve a lasting peace when you have a series of UN General Assembly resolutions calling for a stop in the fighting, where you have these meetings and diplomatic activity going on? How do you achieve that? Well, the starting point is UN Resolution 242, which established the boundaries and parameters that are internationally recognized, including by Israel. So the question is, why will Israel not accept that now? The second point, if you wish to achieve a solution, the United States must impose it. The United States is the only country in the world with the influence and the power to stop Netanyahu, whether it's withholding funds, whether it's withholding arms. There are many things the United States could do, which Biden and his team are refusing to do. Now, this would include mutual security guarantees for Israel and for the Palestinians and the neighbors. Obviously, killing more Palestinians is not a guarantee of security, long-term security for Israel. Now, finally, the fourth point, and this is the most important, the one that the Schiller Institute and Helga Zepp-LaRouche have emphasized going back to the 70s and 80s in the work of Lyndon LaRouche. The key to peace is economic development. Lyndon LaRouche drafted the Oasis Plan, which was a plan to desalinate water, to create parallel rivers from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea, from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, and to line those canals with nuclear power plants to desalinate water to allow the land there to be cultivated. Also to provide power for an industrial policy. And this was incorporated to a large extent in the Oslo Accord, the economic annexes that were worked out between a team under Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres with Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, who at the time was Arafat's assistant. The discussion that was finalized in the Oslo Accord was that peace depends not just on a commitment to lay down arms, but on a commitment for mutual benefit, mutual development along the lines of the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the religious warfare in Europe in 1648. That's the whole point of the Oasis Plan. Now, there'll be this Friday, the next meeting of the International Peace Coalition will include a presentation by my colleague Marcia Mary Baker on the Oasis Plan, how it works, how it would provide a mutual economic development platform, including new technologies, industry, advances in agriculture, and especially transportation, new transportation corridors connecting the Middle East with Europe, with Asia, and with Africa. Without this, you have nothing but promises which have been broken over and over and over by both sides. So the idea of Oslo, again going back to LaRouche's idea, is you create a vested interest on all sides in achieving a peace which will benefit everyone, and that you change the culture so that there's a recognition that peace depends on security for the other. Now, an example of how this could work, what could force Netanyahu to change his policy? I'm going to link an article that I wrote on what Eisenhower did to end the Suez Crisis in 1956. This is when the British, the French, and the Israelis invaded Egypt out of anger that Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. But it was also, Nasser was a leader of the non-aligned movement and was opposing the idea of having to divide into blocks, either the Soviet bloc or the Western bloc, and instead to have a path toward economic development for the nations coming out of colonialism. The French had an interest in getting rid of Nasser because he was supporting the Algerian rebels who were trying to decolonize Algeria. The British wanted to get the canal to secure the shipment of oil to the United Kingdom. And by the way, there is an oil interest today in Gaza, which we can take up at a later point. But what Eisenhower said to the British when they asked him, would you join our crusade to get rid of Nasser? Eisenhower rejected it and threatened to dump British pound sterling bonds, which would have forced the British to buy them back with scarce dollars. And at that point, the British pulled back along with the French and the Israelis, and the war ended. The invasion was stopped. That's the power the American president has. That's the power Biden would have if he put it on the line today to Netanyahu. And that's what we have to demand, that the U.S. act to end this war, act to end this annihilation of a people. That's not a defense of Hamas. That's a defense of the human race and the idea that a cycle of violence has to be broken by something of mutual benefit for all sides. So I'm going to include the invitation to this Friday's International Peace Coalition meeting. I'd urge you, attend. It's online. You can join it. You can listen in. You can participate as much as you want. Bring your friends. There is a way out of this crisis. There is an exit strategy, but it depends on having an economic policy to back up the commitment to mutual security. So that's my report for today, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.